We're good.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us on Tenant Talk Live. My name is Renee Willis. I'm with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And this is one of our special editions of Tenant Talk Live. We've been focusing on responding to coronavirus. And as always with Tenant Talk Live really is an opportunity for residents to connect, to share their stories, and also to learn how to best influence public policy. So we're excited that you've joined us here today. We have some great speakers lined up for you. So first you'll hear from Keith Swiney, who is the president and CEO of Motivation, Inc. Then you will hear from Ed Gramlich. Ed is a senior advisor with the coalition. And he'll provide updates on public housing and multi-family housing as well, what's happening at the federal level. And then we have Kyle Arbuckle with the coalition as well, who is on the field team, who will also provide updates. So again, we're very excited that you're here joining us today. We will record Tenant Talk Live, so we'll send a link out to everyone who's on this call. And any references or any material that we reference during this presentation, we'll send links to that as well to you. But first, I would love to and like to introduce Diane Yantel, who is the president of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, to welcome you guys. Diane.
Thanks, Renee, and hello, everybody. Thanks again for joining our, I think this is our third special COVID-19 Tenant Talk Live call. And really appreciate you all taking the time. It's such a busy time and you all are doing such important work in your communities that I know it can be difficult to carve out the time, but as Renee said, I think we all believe it's really important for us to spend time together talking about what's happening at the federal level, what's happening at the state and local level, and really mostly hearing from all of you about what's happening in your communities and what you're doing to respond. It's also a very important time when it comes to federal advocacy, and these next few weeks and this next month will be critical, and we're going to continue to rely on the great advocacy that you all do to make it possible for us to achieve our policy priorities. We've talked in the past about a need for substantial money for rental assistance to keep the lowest income renters stably housed during this pandemic. And last week, just late last week and early this week, today, we have legislation introduced in both the House and the Senate with over 160 members of Congress on as original co-sponsors for a bill to provide $100 billion in emergency rental assistance. And this is one of our top priorities for the organization now, and one of our top priorities in this next coronavirus spending package. We're also working to make sure that there's additional money for shelter and service providers that serve people who are experiencing homelessness. We're pushing for a national moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. Again, all of this to ensure that none of us lose our homes or even have a fear of losing our homes in the middle of a public health emergency. And also pushing for money for public housing and some other very important provisions. So it's a huge lift right now to be able to get this done, but it's badly needed. And I know that together, when we all activate and work and fight together, that we will be able to achieve it, but we can't do it without you. So I want to thank you too in advance for all of your advocacy in the coming weeks, because it's really never been more important. And to thank you again for all of the good and very important work that you're doing in your communities. Also want to say a special welcome and thank you to our guest speaker today, Keith Swiney. We're really excited to have you on and grateful for you to take the time to share your expertise with our Tenant Talk Live participants today. So thanks, Keith, for joining. Thanks to all of you for joining, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And Renee, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Diane. And let's go ahead and get started. We have a very special guest with us today, Keith Swiney, who is the president and CEO of Motivation Inc., based in Atlanta, I believe, all the way from Atlanta. Thank you for joining us, Keith. And Keith, I think many of you may know Keith and have met Keith because Keith goes all across the country to provide trainings and education on Section 3 compliance. I know he's helped numerous resident associations and residents with their own businesses, and just the various training opportunities that he's provided across the country. And like I said, I'm pretty sure that many of you have already met Keith. But without further ado, I want to introduce our next speaker, our guest speaker, to share with us what opportunities are available in this pandemic. Keith, take it away.
Thank you so much. First, Diane, thank you. Renee, thank you. I appreciate it. Good evening, afternoon, wherever you may be in the country, everyone. So I decided, instead of doing the normal slideshow kind of presentation, I really wanted to make this more conversational because there are a lot of questions, and I get a lot of these more now than ever before. The real focus I would like to kind of talk about this afternoon is really dealing more with the business side of Section 3, more than just the standard compliance, and I'll explain why. Section 3, under the regulation, all emergencies are exempt, so they are not covered. Only normal expenditures are part of Section 3. I contacted Stephanie Waller-Thomas with HUD, of course, under the Office of Economic Opportunities in Section 3 a few weeks ago. And I said, I'm getting a lot of questions and I have a lot of concern about how Section 3 is going to work in this pandemic, where there are a number of states of emergencies that have already gone into effect across the country. We have a federal state of emergency. Therefore, almost anything that happens with your recipients that they're spending money on, for example, public housing as an example, everything that they're doing across the country is all emergency driven, everything. So all of that work would be exempt. However, we have a number of resident-owned businesses that are out there operating. What does this mean for them? So since we aren't really going to deal with a lot of just the day-to-day operational stuff, I did want to focus on Section 3 resident-owned businesses, what's happening with them, and quite frankly, what should be happening and how you all can participate. Number one, first thing to know is if you already have an existing business that your local housing authority is aware of, and that means that they are cognizant that your business is legal and in operation, and that you are there and providing services, whether they've ever contracted with you or not. Even in an emergency, if you are available to do that work, you should still be getting that call, right? You should be a part of that pool of contractors that they're turning to. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We have a young lady in Connecticut who has a cleaning business, and she started that business kind of when gung-ho. She got her certification doing biohazard cleanups, hoarder houses, cat and dog, other animal hoarders, even unfortunately having to clean up after incidents of death. And so she is perfectly qualified and has all the right certifications to be able to go in and start cleaning these high-rise buildings and other spaces, even the office building for the local housing authority. But yet she wasn't getting the call. And I said, well, wow, why is that? What's going on? Why would that be the case? And it turned out that a simple piece of paper that she was supposed to have delivered months ago, she never delivered, which put her firmly on their radar. So it's making certain that you've done all the little things that are necessary to ensure that the local housing authority knows that you have a business and that that business is operational and ready. In another instance, we have one in Illinois. Young lady also has a cleaning business. Lady has a cleaning business, and she's been busy as can be. The housing authority has no more family housing, but they have a lot of senior housing. And the housing authority has had a very difficult time keeping the seniors from congregating in the entry to the buildings and in the normal congregation areas, but because that's just what seniors do. And because of that, instead of her having to clean 3 times a week, she's now cleaning twice a day. So her profits and revenues have skyrocketed during this period just because that cleaning is necessary. And again, so that's a matter of a business having already been in effect. We helped to structure that business. We did her training, of course. We worked with her. The Housing Authority did the right thing by providing all the startup capital necessary to get her there. And then they wrote her contracts. So that's an instance where a resident-owned business was in the right place, right time, and doing well, and then has had growth through this. Not every business will have that, but the Section 3 regulations in partnership with the 963 regulation under 24 CFR make it very clear that if you own these businesses, you are to receive first tier preference when qualified. And so it's all about what business you're in and how you're doing in that business as to how much you will take on. So one of the pieces of advice I want to give you is be very careful about the type of business you structure. We have businesses because some housing authorities aren't really concerned about the type of business and whether or not they're helping that business to survive as much as they're trying to just help the resident become a business owner. Therefore, we have businesses that do things that the housing authorities will never procure. That's not helpful to the housing authority. Yeah, I appreciate people want to have sandwich shops and they want to have their food trucks. We have one person who has a limo service, which is great, but at no time has the housing authority in its 60-year existence ever procured a limo service. Just hasn't. When they order sandwiches, they order them from the deli. They don't bring in a caterer. So you really want to think about the business you're structuring and whether or not that business is in line with the standard, what I call commodities codes, that housing authority generally procures under. If you're thinking about turnkey, yeah, residents have made millions of dollars doing that. Turnkey, by the way, will still exist. We have contractors right now, resident-owned businesses who are still a part of that, whether they're doing cleaning or they're just in there painting or what have you, because those units still need to be made ready because they still need to fill those units. And so there are things that are still taking place, maybe not at the pace that they did once before. Instead of layering subs into these units, they're bringing them in one by one. We have the same happening with construction. We have a young lady in a construction trade skills program right now. It has been delayed. She will finally start in 2 weeks, but it's been delayed for the last 3 months as we're trying to figure out the right way to bring her in. It's in a union environment, and the unions had a lot of concerns about how many people were in units. Were they having masks? All of these things are happening in this COVID-19 environment, and they're all realistic things. And by the way, don't get angry, right? Everybody who owns a business or runs a business or even works for a business, we're all trying to figure it out. How to work in this new time, in this new era, and still be profitable, be relevant, and have some value on the other side. So I would encourage any resident that's right now listening. Number one, the 24 CFR 963. Certainly if you've been in a training room with me, you have heard it, you've seen me quote it over and over again. I definitely want you to go read it. It is a 5-minute read. It'll be the fastest reg you'll ever read with the greatest impact to residents. Remember, it is the one that I described as designed to help residents become, public housing residents to become millionaires. It is specific to public housing residents and legal residents of the unit, so they don't even have to be necessarily a leaseholder, but on the lease legally. And that one rule alone will answer most of your questions about how to be successful. They call onto that under the, I hate quoting regs, so I'll leave that to Ed to do. But under the Section 3 rule, it actually says that one of the ways in which agencies can comply is by implementing the 963. So residents or housing authorities are encouraged to do so. In some cases, even though municipalities don't have to recognize the 963, the fact that you are still a qualified resident-owned business, they have given that same preference. So regardless of who you are, regardless of what type of business you're in, if it's in any of the commodity codes where a housing authority, city, county, or state are operating, you should be involved in that. And you have to make yourself known and make certain, again, that if there's one piece of paper that you need, even if it's a $10 business license, I want you to get that. It's very important because the rule says your business must be legally formed. So please keep those thoughts in mind. If you have questions about that funding, which I imagine when I said those words that the Housing Authority provided the startup funding, that probably triggered a lot of thoughts in a lot of minds. I can certainly help you understand that. So let's start the conversation there. I'm sure a lot of people are trying to figure out how to survive this. So you all tell me how it works, Kyle, where the questions come in and how they get shared.
Okay, great. So if folks want to ask questions, at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button that you can press and ask questions. And I think there may be folks on the call as well, on a call. But Kyle, how would people who are on a call or on the phone submit questions?
That was a good question. Well, we did just get one in the Q&A box. Linda asked, is that funding a wash? Is it disregarded as income?
The funding for the startup capital for the business?
I believe.
That is business income. It does not affect your personal income unless you're using part of it for payroll that you would take personally. Other than that, all of the other funding remains a business expense and does not affect your income at all.
Okay. Linda, if that didn't answer your question, she said earnings question mark, I think that's what you meant, right?
That's a great question. Yeah, so let me explain that. One of the things we do when we structure a resident-owned business is we always include 90 days of payroll at a minimum. In some businesses, we'll actually go as far as to put in 180 days of payroll. The one thing you should never do is start a business in the hole, meaning, Linda, don't start a business and just assume that your standard income stream is going to remain constant. So one of the biggest mistakes people make is they think that they can rob Peter to pay Paul while starting a business, and that's very ineffective. What you do, and the way we do it is we make sure that in the startup capital, you have enough money to pay all of your bills and maintain your current standard of living over a period of time that we believe is sufficient to get your business up and running. So when you take that payroll check or withdrawal, however you choose to do it, then it becomes income to you, and then you are obligated to report that. But all of the other funds that go toward insurance and materials and supplies, and even if you're buying a new vehicle, which we've had people do, none of that becomes personal income to you.
Great. I have a question that came in right before this webinar. So the question is, do Section 3 regulations apply during an emergency that is declared at the local level and sanctioned at the federal level? And second part of this is, if there is a conflict, does state/local regulations supersede federal?
Okay, now this is the $1 million issue. So a few weeks ago, I said I talked with Stephanie Waller-Thomas, the director, and I actually, in our communication, she said, hey, would you write me all of those questions that you have so that I can respond to them and I'll put them out in the form of a FAQ. So if you haven't seen it yet, and I've tried to share it with as many people as I can think of, that FAQ actually responds to this question very quickly. So number one, I'm going to answer it in two parts. Number one, Section 3 requirements as such are a congressional act, if you will. Section 3 is a congressional act, and only Congress can move it or waive it in any form. The department chose not to request its waiver under the CARES Act. And when Stephanie Waller put the FAQ out, question number one is, no, Section 3 is not being waived in any part. It remains in effect. And therefore, part two now, regardless of what happens locally, that particular rule still survives, and all of the recipients of that money, meaning the local housing authorities, the cities, the counties, the state that is distributing downward into cities and counties or to nonprofits, any developers in your area, Linda, that may be developing projects that are being funded in part with those home funds or some CDBG dollars or whatever it is, that means Section 3 is still alive and well. And it doesn't move for anybody because specifically, and this is a little in the weeds, I apologize, every federal department was asked by the White House if they wanted any specific waivers under the CARES Act when it came out as part of the COVID response. FHEO, Fair Housing Equal Opportunity, the department in which Section 3 is governed under, had none. And therefore, Section 3 still survives. And there have been zero changes except the director decided to delay the reporting by the recipients until the end of July. Initially, it was the end of June or June 1, and then she pushed it to the end of July. But other than that, all requirements are still there. And no matter what's happening in your community, Section 3 is alive and well, and I can prove it. We're blessed to be one of the only people probably as busy as we are. We've added more contract work because of those projects. Linda, here's a little tip for you and for everyone else. Anytime HUD monies are being used for construction, unless there is some major earth-shattering event, construction will go on. It may at times move a little slower, but it will go on because, especially when you're using affordable housing development dollars and low-income housing tax credits, those are very time and date sensitive for activities, and therefore they must continue to work. So that's where you make your money, to be, by the way, is follow that line of activity and construction. Even if you're just doing construction cleanup, you're doing flagging, whatever it is, Section 3 is alive and well. So despite what's happening locally, or even what the president may say, it is going to still be in effect. Hope that helps you.
Thank you. Kyle, do you want to ask the next question?
Yes.
Actually, before he does that, can I say that I've gotten a couple of emails where people, I agree with Keith's assessment, but a number of people are confused, and I frankly get confused too, because the response to that first question says that, a conflict would exist only if a state or local law or emergency order prohibited recipients or subrecipients, contractors, subcontractors from hiring or contracting consistent with their Section 3 obligations. So how do we get people beyond that kind of confusing legalized language?
Yeah, and you can be sure that an attorney wrote that answer, right? This is really easy for us. To my knowledge, with the exception of the state of Ohio, which, by the way, we have projects there that we manage compliance for. With that exception, everyone else was able to continue construction. Again, there were some guidelines that were put in place, how many people can be in a space, how large a space, that sort of thing. But that we are aware, and I even went through this with Stephanie, we were not aware of any other place where that conflict existed. So Ed, let me go a little bit deeper. When I sent the question to her, I literally sent her that question and I framed it around the 1994 interim rule, which actually carries that language, because I was very much concerned that we would have this kind of variance between the local law versus the federal law, and maybe even a state ordinance or law. And there could be, but no one, I guess, thought enough of Section 3 to write in a specific, if you will, prohibition from that construction or from Section 3 activities continuing. So we've been on fire, literally trying to balance all of our work. So I think that unless someone comes to you, and I'm speaking to all of you as a group, unless someone comes to you and specifically says that particular requirement has been waived, and you say, great, can you send that to me in writing? Because I want to share that with Keith Swiney. Unless you see that, I wouldn't buy into it, because again, Ed, we've not seen it yet. Other than Ohio. Ohio did have an absolute moratorium at the time, but it opened up again, and even our projects are moving again there.
Keith, I've not had much interaction with Stephanie because she's kind of new to me, and that's kind of your business. But because this is so confusing, and some resident leaders have kind of gone back and forth with me on this quite reasonably, do you think Stephanie would be open to something that's less legalese and clarifying this for residents, kind of a simpler presentation, so that people don't feel like, well, Section 3 is off the table until the coronavirus passes?
Two parts to that. Number one is I'm going to ask her, right? Because I'm happy to do that, and we have a great relationship. So I will reach out to her on that. And also because I can hear it in your voice, and when I think it through a little deeper, I can see that there could be some local governments or housing authorities who would actually use this as an excuse to try to push back on residents and resident growth and income earning. So let me ask that question and let me see what I get, and I'll share it back with Renee, and then she can pass it on to the group, okay?
That's great, thank you, Keith.
Sure.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Kyle, who's next? What other questions?
Mrs. Brown asked, how do you get PHAs to provide startup money and more Section 3 training?
And that's the $1,000,000 question. So the way in which we normally manage it, Ms. Brown, is that we go in and we try to meet with that agency directly, and we understand through a series of questions and answers of what are their objectives for their residents. What are they trying to accomplish? Are they trying to, as we call it, build their human resident capital as fast as they are rebuilding their real capital, that real estate? And when we find that we have a receptive leader, and it really has to be top down, we don't just talk to line item or middle managers. We deal directly with the CEOs, CFOs, the people who have to make this happen. And once we have that, we literally present them a proposal which outlines, believe it or not, it firmly outlines what those costs could look like. So with the training, because without proper training and technical assistance, you have a really high failure rate. So what we do is we build it all together and we said, here's the package. And if you will fund it, we will manage it. And that's been the biggest key for them. Mrs. Brown, a lot of agencies would be willing to cough up some cash, but they have this tremendous fear we normally hear about how that money will be managed. So again, some of that, and as I tell people all the time, if you come across an agency that you live in and you want us to pursue that for you, just send me the contact information for the CEO or CFO or whoever, and I'll be happy to reach out to them on your behalf and start that dialogue and just see what we can dig up for you, because oftentimes they just don't know that there's an avenue out there where somebody does this professionally and can help to manage the process for them.
I think this was a somewhat similar question. It was Mrs. Brown as well, but she asked, under the new rule, what is HUD's plan to enhance capacity of Section 3 residents and business?
Oh, well, that's a very different question, actually, Kyle,
Okay.
because the intent of what HUD wrote under the proposed new rule and what will happen are two very different things, right? And I don't do a really good job of foreseeing the future, but I can tell you what my intel has told me. The objective here was to enhance resident opportunities. If you look at every way in which the reg was written, that proposed rule was written, it was written to provide a certain amount of preference to these residents, quote unquote. But the truth of the matter is if you are a public housing resident, you're actually on the shortest end of the stick. If you are a low income person, a Section 3 resident, as they are known, because you reside within the legal boundaries of where the work is being spent, and you are based on income, you are considered low or very low income, the rule actually provides a greater benefit to those people than it does public housing. And I'll clarify that very quickly. The rule talks about hours worked. Instead of the new hire rule, Mrs. Brown, they've put in place this big push on hours worked. The belief HUD has said is that the old rule of new hires was manipulated, and it was. And it was manipulatable, and it was. And that if they put in a qualifier like residents must work X number of hours, a percentage of the hours everyone else works, then they feel that there's a great benefit. But the rule, as proposed, said 25% of the total hours worked had to be worked by Section 3 residents. Only 5% of the total had to be worked by public housing residents. So in that case, we see this kind of inversion happening where public housing residents are actually being kind of, and I'd hate to say it, but I can tell you, I've had personal conversations, and this is what they said. They said, listen, public housing is going away. And therefore, we want to find a greater benefit for those people who are low or very low income, who live in the communities where our money is being expended, not the people who live on them, because we don't expect to have those very long. So that tells you an awful lot. But is there some movement? Yeah, there is. They didn't get into a lot of the benefits on the resident-owned business side, so we'll have to wait and see what they come up with on that. Back to you, Kyle.
Okay, thank you. Bernadette asked, if you are a 501c3, how do you start the paperwork? Where do you get the paperwork to be submitted?
For what? The paperwork for a Section 3 business, or because is she already a 501c3? Do we know?
I don't know that. Bernadette, if you want to follow up on that, and you can ask it in the question box too. Keith asked, how can I get basic assistance information with ideas for a startup NLIHC business?
Well, I'm going to tell you again, follow the money, Keith. There are a lot of places where housing authorities spend money, but some of those places, they spend it in a very localized way. I think the thing and this is the way I treat all small businesses. First of all, determine what your passion is. The reason I can get up every day, I can work late, I can travel 300 nights a year is because I'm passionate about what I do. Keith, the very first thing you have to do is decide what you want to do. And because I'm going to be honest with you, if your real passion is fishing, as an example, which I love fishing, find something that ties into that passion. But if in fact you have a passion for doing the type of work that a housing authority does, identify that particular type of scope of work. Look at it carefully. Feel free to send me an email at any time. You can call, you can text. I'm open to everyone in the country. My phone number is on my website. We can talk through the particulars, but what I'm going to be listening for is whether or not you have a passion for it. Where you don't do well in resident-owned businesses is trying to learn how to do something that you've never done before as a business. That is a recipe for a lot of hurt and pain. Not necessarily failure, but you will go through a lot of pain, okay?
Bernadette said they are a 501c3.
Perfect. So if Bernadette and her group are already a 501c3, there's problem number one. Now, I don't mean that flippantly. Let me explain the logic to this. Nonprofits, as they are really mission driven. I can look right at Diane on the screen.
Keith, can I stop you for a second? She followed up too on that. She said she's looking to get paperwork to be recognized to be a business to start a resident owned.
Perfect. As a 501c3 though.
I think so, yeah.
That's the key, right? Okay. So because 501c3 businesses, these are really, really, mission driven, right? The businesses that do really, really well are profit driven, to be quite frank with you. It's not that you can't do both, but I'm just being honest, number one. Number two, if you want to figure that out, check with the local housing authority, the city, the county, where you live. Talk to their economic and development department, community economic and development, community and housing. Figure out how and what paperwork they use to qualify for Section 3 businesses. Generally, the process to qualify as a Section 3 business is done at the time of bid. There will be specific forms inside of the bid packages for the type of work you are looking to do, assuming they're procuring that, and they will have you complete the necessary forms to become a Section 3 resident-owned business. You can actually do it without the paperwork if you can send something to that agency or those agencies that say, here's my business, here's all of our business paperwork, and we believe we meet the Section 3 preference at this level. And let me just go over those really quickly. One is a resident-owned business, and here's where you're gonna lose sight of as a 501c3. You don't own a 501c3 generally, right? So you don't own the business, and to date, no recipient has recognized a board of directors or your association leaders or anything of that nature individually. What they recognize is a business, quote unquote. So you have to determine who's in ownership because the rule says that the business must be owned and operated at 51% or greater by low or very low income residents. Number two, 30% of the people you employ are all low or very low income. That you probably can meet. If you can meet one of those two, you're in great shape. The third one is dealing with subcontracting. I don't even want to get into it because that's going away hard and fast. So let's focus really on whether or not your business can employ others. And if they are employing those other people, make certain that those people reside right there within the locale of where you want the work to be. If you want to see what some of that paperwork looks like, I think Renee said you would send out my contact as part of the stuff. Send me an email and I'll send you over some samples of what those look like, and you can actually use those exact documents if you want.
I was going to ask, somebody asked that, how can we get in touch with you? So
Yes,
I'll put your email in the chat if that's okay.
Yeah, and give them my cell phone number, if anybody's sitting there with an ink pen, and you can certainly include it, Kyle, it's 678-794-3066. Again, 678-794-3066. 3066. Feel free to text or call, and just be reasonable because I get a lot of those. I always call everyone back same day.
And I
Okay.
can vouch for that. He's very responsive.
I try my very best. Despite how late it is, right? Because I will call you late or send you an email at 2 in the morning. Just know that.
All right. I think that's it, unless Bernadette has any other follow-up questions, but I think that's it.
I have a question.
Okay, we just got one more from Linda. This might be a question for you, Ed. Question about owning a home on a Section 8 voucher. Would training other residents how to buy a home from out of their own public housing rentals be legitimate business, online and home visiting bases when clearable 6 feet apart? And how can a Section 8 voucher be used to purchase a home?
Tell you the truth, I've never really paid attention to that portion of the voucher law or regulations. So I just don't know. It would take a considerable amount of research, and then you'd probably get bad information from me anyway. Sorry.
Can you go back? I'll be happy to chime in where I can. I believe it or not, I'm a certified home counselor through HUD, and I've done many of the, listen, at 34 years in real estate, I've done it all. Kyle, ask the question slowly one more time and let me see if I can pick out a part I can give her an answer to.
Okay. Would training other residents how to buy a home from out of their own public housing rentals be a legitimate business? Online and home visiting bases when clearable 6 feet apart? And how can a Section 8 voucher be used to purchase a home?
Wow, that first part is a powerful one. Well, here's the short answer. In order for anybody to purchase assets from a local housing authority, number one, the housing authority has to be willing to sell them. All right, that's the first thing I need you to know. How you pay for those is a question to be determined before you even make an offer or you approach a housing authority. Has it happened? Yes. So be clear. I have represented interests where they have wanted a piece of property that a housing authority owned, or a number of homes even that they wanted, and we approached them to see if we could convince them to put them on the market, because there are some protocols that have to take place. Number one is that local housing authority must have a current appraisal of the property so that they're not selling it for undervalue. Number two, you are going to have a line of, a finance source, or showing how you're going to be able to purchase that property. They're going to ask you for some sort of a letter confirming that you have the resources. How you pay for it out of any of your funds is your business now, but if you're looking for them to fund it, I've never seen or heard that happen before. If you're looking for more information on whether or not and how you purchase a home using Section 8 vouchers, in fact, Mrs. Brown, one of your board members at the coalition, just sent me some information on that. So I'm certain either she's willing to share that, or I would be happy to, if they send me a request, I'll forward it over, the same information that Ms. Brown just shared with me, because she and I were having that discussion just days ago. The middle part on that one, I don't think I can answer for, unfortunately.
Okay.
The one thing that I will be happy to do is I will look up those regulations and any other kind of guidance that PIH has put out about using Section 8 voucher funding for eventual home purchasing. So in combination with what Mrs. Brown has sent you, Keith, we might be able to piece together a little bit of information for that person.
Yeah. Now, I do know one thing Mrs. Brown just determined. The local housing authority who administers the voucher must have a home ownership program, a voucher for home ownership program. That is the first requirement, which we hate. But in order to get that altered, you'd either have to go to HUD somehow, or the regional HUD office or DC, to ask for some sort of a waiver, because someone has to administer that payment still the same way they would now under that voucher for home ownership program. You wouldn't think it would be that difficult, but I would give you one last piece of advice. If where you live, that housing authority does not have a voucher to home ownership program, port that voucher somewhere that does. You need to be in a position right now. I think you're crazy to own a voucher and be paying rent. You should be leveraging that voucher all day for that 15 years of mortgage that they're going to pay for you. So definitely look at the places that you desire to live, confirm whether or not they have a program, port that voucher out to that location, then transfer it into home ownership would be my advice.
Great. Mrs. Brown had another question. Would the 958 complaint form be eliminated under the new rule? If removed, what protections would there be for public assisted and low income people?
Yeah, that's $1 million one, Mrs. Brown. So first and foremost, I should tell everyone that HUD introduced the fact that form would be dissolved and would go away. Those forms expired. The 958 expired November of 2018, right? So did the Spears Section 3 report, the 6002 OMB number, the Office of Management and Budget number that governs it. So the 958 and the 60,002 were both put through the Federal Register, 60 days of comment, and they both went away. You didn't know that, but they did. They went away because in the proposed new rule, HUD actually said they were going away. HUD's plans were to eliminate the 958 complaint, and to my knowledge, they have not brought that back. There is no formal method for anyone, contractor or resident, no beneficiary or anyone else, to file a formal complaint under the new rule. We've talked about it. I have raised my hands. I've gone to DC. I've screamed and yelled. Stephanie Waller-Thomas, because I threatened to tell everybody in the country they didn't have an obligation to report, and this is the truth, this is what happened, because under the OMB requirement, if that number that they provide, that OMB, Office of Management and Budget number, that supports the 60,002, which is what Spears goes under now, if it's not valid, there's no requirement to report. And therefore, I threatened to go out and tell the country that they had no requirement to report. So the HUD did go in. You should find it in the Federal Register where they were introducing a request to continue that number for now. But the 958, no ma'am, there is no continuation for it right now.
Okay. Next question from Bernadette. Will comment, but I think she'd like some comment from you on this. NYCHA contracts and union rules have made it very difficult for residents to be gainfully employed. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Keith.
I have a lot of thoughts about that, but we don't have nearly enough time to hear all of them. So here's the short answer. In 2015, when HUD issued its last proposed rule, that rule never went final. But when HUD issued it, in the preamble, HUD was very clear that the project labor agreements that existed, and they specifically called out places like New York and Chicago, where they had reviewed these project labor agreements, which protect this work to the labor unions. HUD said that they were all invalid. They were all invalid of the Section 3 rule. They were in non-compliance with it, and that they needed to be rewritten. And even though HUD did not finalize that rule, that guidance still remains the same. Those documents are just invalid. There are two ways to get things done in New York, right? And I've spent a lot of time in New York. So I think I can say this to you honestly, and I hope fairly. Number one, there are some 400,000 residents in New York. If you're tired of just being used and being walked on and being lied to and being mistreated, that massive number, even if you took 20,000 people and you stood them in front of the building down at 90 Church or 250 Broadway, you could move things. You could make change happen. But one person isn't going to do it alone. And I don't mean any disrespect, but I've sat in a lot of rooms in New York, and I've turned around and the people weren't there. So you have to get the people behind you. Number two is, if nothing else, you really have to go and work with your city council leaders. You have to go talk to your borough presidents, maybe talk to your community boards. You have to get a lot of support from people to move NYCHA. Is it because they don't want to? I don't know. Is it because they're just stuck in their own ways? I found that to be the case a lot in a lot of meetings I've been in New York, where they just don't want to change. So change comes about because the people make it come about. So my advice to you is, get with the people of the associations, your district leaders, the CCOP, and make change happen. Bernadette.
That's great, Keith. Thank you so very much. We're going to leave it at that. Hopefully we answered everyone's questions. Keith, we really, really do appreciate your willingness to be with us and taking the time out to answer, the questions that residents across the country have about Section 3 and what to do in a time like this. So thank you so very much. And we will be waiting to hear back from you once you get in contact with Stephanie over at HUD. And once you send me that information, I'll make sure that everyone on this call will get that information.
Good. Thank you guys very much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, everybody. Have a good evening.
You as well. Thank you so much, Keith.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
So we're going to move on to Ed Gramlich, who is going to give us some updates on multifamily housing and public housing as well, public and Indian housing. Ed.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm going to give you an update on things that have come out from HUD since the last time I yammered at you about what HUD was up to. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing, which also goes by the acronym PIH. They issued a formal notice. It's called 2020-08. It was done on April 28th, and it implements the CARES Act funding provisions, or at least part of it, that pertain to the Housing Choice Voucher supplemental appropriation that came through the CARES Act. Now, you may recall from the last time I was talking to you that the CARES Act appropriated $1.25 billion supplemental funding for voucher for the voucher program. And this is all to prepare for, and to respond to the coronavirus, and to help public housing agencies, which also goes by the acronym PHAs, to maintain their normal operations and to take on other necessary actions during the pandemic. Now, out of that $1.25 billion, you might recall that I said $850 million is set aside as an additional amount of money for public housing admin fees, or to meet admin costs, and to meet other expenses that a PHA might incur during implementing and carrying out their voucher program. The Act also established a couple of new eligible activities that can be funded with these supplemental funds. So this guidance, this notice 2020-08, only talks about $380 million out of that $850 million that was appropriated for additional admin fees. It can used for two general purposes that were outlined in the CARES Act, and the notice kind of reiterates what's already in the Act. It says, first, it covers any current eligible voucher activities for administrative costs during the period that the pandemic impacts the PHA. Currently, eligible administrative costs include necessary upgrades to information technology and computer systems to enhance the PHA's ability to have its staff telework. And it can also be used for overtime pay for PHA staff to carry out voucher-related responsibilities. A second general provision, it allows PHAs to carry out new coronavirus-related activities, including activities to support or maintain the health and safety of assisted households, and to meet the costs related to trying to keep and support voucher landlords. The notice lists a variety of eligible activities that are coronavirus-related activities, such as delivering goods, such as food and medical supplies to voucher households. It could mean relocating families to health units or other designated units for testing, hospitalization, or quarantine even, or for transportation to these localities to limit the exposure that would be caused by residents using mass transportation. Another eligible possible use is providing childcare for PHA staff that would not otherwise have occurred because these children the children of staff have to stay home because schools are closed, or because the PHA staff person is working unusual hours than hours they would not normally be working. Now, in addition to that 2020-08 notice, HUD also posted on April 10th a one-page list of eligible coronavirus-related activities for the Housing Choice Voucher admin appropriation, admin cost appropriation. This list includes all 9 things that were previously listed in the 2020-08 notice, but it also has one new eligible activity, and that is to hire temporary workers for the PHA to help them maintain operations due to the coronavirus. PIH also says that as new eligible activities come up, they will post them on the Housing Choice Voucher webpage at PIH, and we'll also kind of keep you up to date on any new things that are added to that eligible list. Now you might be thinking, okay, I've talked about the out of that $1.25 billion, I've talked about a portion of the $850 million that's for admin fees. What's the remaining amount of money? That's an additional $400 million out of that $1.25 billion. It's for additional housing assistance payments, or HAPs, if you will. HUD has not put out a notice yet about how that's going to happen, but they're going to be putting it out sometime soon, and we'll tell you about that when it does happen. So I'm going to now go to yet another notice. This one's about the Public Housing Operating Fund, the supplemental money that Congress appropriated through the CARES Act. You might recall that Congress appropriated an additional $685 million for the Public Housing Operating Fund. Notice PIH 2020-07. So I got done talking about the 08 notice. This is the 07 notice that talks about the Public Housing Operating Fund implementation. And again, this is to help prevent, prepare for, and to respond to coronavirus. That kind of mantra you hear all throughout the CARES Act: prevent, prepare for, and respond to. That money can also be used to help public housing agencies maintain their normal operations and to take other necessary actions during the pandemic. The notice also provides guidance about that the CARES Act provides regarding allowing PHAs to use their previously appropriated capital fund money as well as their operating fund money to enable the PHA to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus. These funds can be used for eligible activities during the period of time when the coronavirus is impacting the operations of the PHA. So not necessarily time limited. The funds can also be used for other expenses, such as supporting and maintaining the health and safety of assisted households in public housing, or to support the education and childcare needs of impacted residents. Now, those two things are brand new as a result of the CARES Act. So providing education and childcare for public housing residents. That notice 2020-07 lists potential uses of funds, and they break them down to the 3 things: preventing, preparing for, and responding to coronavirus. So in the context of for preventing coronavirus, funds can be used to prevent the spread of the virus to residents and to staff. Some examples include delivering supplies so that staff or residents can shelter in place. It could be transporting residents for coronavirus testing or for other kind of preventive health measures. It could be used for protecting residents, particularly high-risk residents, from exposure due to any interactions with PHA staff. Now, in the context of responding to the coronavirus, once coronavirus has spread to staff or residents, PHAs can use this extra money to care for those who have become infected and to also limit exposure and spread of the virus in public housing. Funds can be used to, continue to be used after the outbreak for any kind of continuing expenses that might be incurred as a result of the virus. And some examples in the notice include caring for residents and staff who have tested positive but do not require immediate hospitalization. It could be safely transporting residents and staff who are in need of medical attention. And it could be coordinating with local schools and local governments in order to speed up the provision of internet connection infrastructure in public housing and to provide tablets or other kind of low-cost computers for students. Now, in the context of preparing for coronavirus, and you might be saying, what are we talking about preparing for? It's here. Well, we're all anticipating the fact that it may actually spike again, later on in the summer or in the fall or whoever knows when. So thinking ahead, PHAs can use this extra money before a local coronavirus outbreak happens. They can begin to take actions designed to help keep people safe, healthy, reduce their exposure to the virus, and to slow the spread of the virus when it does outbreak again. Some examples include coordinating with providers of services that are needed to support residents as a result of the virus, including the cost of delivering goods, supplies, and equipment. It means coordinating with local health service providers for activities including developing and providing guidance to staff or residents, and for travel for testing. And it could also mean for providing childcare for residents so that the residents can continue to work, as well as providing for childcare for PHA staff. So that's it with public housing and vouchers. Don't want to leave out the multifamily residents. So HUD's Office of Multifamily Housing Programs, which also goes by the shorter name multifamily, that office oversees contracts with private owners of HUD assisted housing. So we're talking here about Section 8 project-based rental assistance. Multifamily made a 5th update to its Q&As. That update took place on May 5th, and they'll probably continue to have more. Most of those updates are not really relevant to residents or advocates, but I will talk about 4 of them. Excuse me, I want to do a little voice clearing. The first is that a Q&A modified is modified to emphasize the fact that it's permissible to evict perpetrators of domestic violence, as well as people who are guilty of other kind of criminal activity or severe lease violations that are not necessarily related to non-payment of rent. A second Q&A is added to confirm that a resident who is unemployed or furloughed can continue to receive income deductions for childcare expenses. A third Q&A states that multifamily owners or agents can access property operating accounts for all reasonable and necessary coronavirus-related preparedness and response actions. This includes things like supplies, extra staff hours, overtime. Supplies might include protective gloves and masks as well for staff as well as for residents. And a fourth Q&A states that property owners or managing agents may close or only offer limited hours or access to rental offices or to indoor common areas based on guidance from local health authorities. So that's it from multifamily. And as I kind of wind down here, I'm going to talk about some materials that HUD has put out to help residents understand the eviction moratorium that comes with the CARES Act. You might recall I talked about that last time as well. So HUD's Office of Multifamily Housing Programs has posted a 2-page flyer, and PIH has a 1-page flyer. Both flyers inform residents that evictions for non-payment of rent and for charges, late fees and charges for non-payment of rent. These are all suspended until July 25th at least. This is according to the CARES Act. The CARES Act also states that even after July 25th, an owner or a PHA can only file for eviction or termination if a household is given a 30-day notice of their intent to take that kind of action. However, that notice can't not be delivered, that 30-day period doesn't even begin until after the end of the moratorium. So for multifamily households, if a household's income has decreased, that household should contact their property management company right away and request an interim income recertification. So the emphasis is, as soon as you know about it, let the property management know. Also, if a household is concerned about the condition of their home, if they don't think it's up to housing quality standards, they should contact their project-based contract administrator, their PBCA, or their regional office. For public housing and voucher households, if someone loses a job or has a significant loss of income, they should request an interim income recertification with their public housing authority as soon as possible. Again, the emphasis is as soon as possible. And you on the call should make sure everybody in your community knows that, particularly with regard to public housing and vouchers, it's important to get to the public housing authority as soon as possible so that they know that an income recertification is necessary. A household rent can therefore be adjusted to reflect that income change, or it's even possible that a household might even be eligible for a financial hardship exemption. For voucher households, the flyer urges households to contact their landlord right away to discuss potential payment plans later on. Unfortunately, and again, for voucher households, the rent adjustment may be retroactive to the time at which the actual income hit was taken, not necessarily when they notified the PHA. However, unfortunately, that is up to the PHA. Each PHA has its own policies. So it's going to be important for you as residents to make sure that you urge your PHA to adopt that waiver authority that HUD has. And then finally, if a household is behind on rent after a moratorium expires after July 25th, or maybe even after that moratorium is extended, for voucher households, you need to negotiate with your landlord to determine requirements to pay their rent after the expiration of the moratorium. For public housing residents, you need to work with your PHA to set up a repayment agreement. Now, finally, PIH has versions of its one-page flyer in many languages on its website. Multifamily also has versions of its two-page flyer in many languages, but so far it's not on their website, unfortunately. So if you're eager to have versions for multifamily of specific languages, please let us know what languages you're interested in, like Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, Arabic, what have you. Let Kyle know, and he will let me know, and we can get those specific languages to you. So you can bug Kyle at KRbuckle at NLIHC, and I will slowly spell that, KARBUCKLE at NLIHC.org. And that's my update.
That's great. Thank you, Ed. And whatever resources you have that you can share with the group, please do send them to me so that I can send them out in the follow-up email that we share.
The language things, so the multifamily one, there are at least, I would say 25 or 30 different languages. So if you want me to send you all of them, and
no, you don't have to do that. Yeah, don't do that. But I think your suggestion was correct. If you have a particular language that you're interested in receiving, send an email to Kyle, and you can also email, a little bit easier to remember maybe, outreach@nlihc.org. Again, that's outreach@nlihc.org. So you can send an email there to indicating the language, and we'll get that information out to you. Perfect. All right, thanks, Ed. So
welcome.
Appreciate you. And Kyle, I know you're going to provide a few field updates.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know that Tenant Talk, the print edition, will be dropping soon. We're hopeful by either the end of this week or next week, we'll have it online and ready to go. I think it's a good addition. It covers pretty much everything housing and COVID-19 related. So gives an overview of the legislation that's been passed, what regulations and guidances have been passed that can affect low-income tenants. So be expecting that soon. And then I also just wanted to mention that Congress is considering another big spending package for COVID-19. And obviously NLIHC is hopeful that housing will be included. And so on Friday, Congressman Denny Heck dropped his emergency rental assistance bill, which would provide $100 billion in rental assistance targeted at low and extremely low income renters. And we're hopeful that this language will be included in the next COVID-19 package, as I just mentioned. So I'm going to put our call to action into the chat box where you can reach out to your member of Congress. And then also, if you're on Twitter or Facebook, make sure you tweet or share, comment at your member of Congress and use the hashtag Rent Relief Now. Yeah, and I think that's it.
All right, thanks, Kyle. So that's what we have for this edition of Tenant Talk Live. We covered a lot. I know that we did. We do have a lot of information on our website, so certainly visit NLIHC.org, and you can go to the COVID-19 tab to get a lot of information that we have for residents to help in your advocacy. Also too, as I mentioned earlier, we will certainly share this recording with you. So we'll get this out to you so that if you want to, if there's something that we said, you want to go back and recall it, you'll have a video of it. As well as we hope that you do share the information and share this video too when we send out the link. Please do share it with people in your community, with residents in your community, so that they know what's going on and also how to best influence housing policy. So that would be great. And it looks like Ed may have something to say.
Yeah. Two things.
I like the pointer.
Right. So I will definitely include those flyers that I mentioned that will be sent out to everybody. And I really want to urge everybody to share those with everybody that you know, especially so that people can take advantage of interim income recertifications, because a lot of people don't know that they can do that. And it's really important that they know that they can do that and take advantage of it. And secondly, I will volunteer to put together a narrative version of what I just yelled at you.
Perfect. That's awesome, Ed. Thank you so much. And then get in touch with us. Again, you can reach us at outreach@nlihc.org. We're always looking for speakers, people who are residents who are willing to share, if you're willing to share your stories with us, that would be fantastic. We can all learn from what you're doing in your community. So please, send an email to us to let us know if you're interested. And I see you're pointing your pointer finger as well, Kyle. What's up?
We have a question that I think Ed might be able to answer. Brandon asked, I hear that PHAs can chain ACOP to extend guest policies, remove screening policies, and waive occupancy limits during stay-at-home orders. Is this a faster than normal process for changing ACOP? Is anyone doing this?
That's definitely something that they can do. I have no idea if anybody's doing it. I would definitely encourage you all to ask, to urge, to twist the arms of your PHAs to do that for a number of reasons. Like people returning to their communities from incarceration may have difficulty finding affordable housing or any housing, and it may be best for them to stay with family and friends. So they would those guest policies need to be amended, or because of the coronavirus, family members might want to be moving in with each other to provide care, support, what have you. And I will highlight that provision in what we send to you after this. But I have no idea to what extent it's actually being done.
Okay, thanks, Ed. And then just to close out again, do share suggestions with us. We want your feedback. One person, I think, or maybe a couple of people on our last call said that it would be more engaging if we did video. And so we're doing that. So we absolutely do listen to your suggestions, because we want to make this stronger and stronger and as helpful as possible. So please do share with us your feedback, your comments, any questions that you have about anything that we said today. We will try to get an answer for you. So look out for an email from us with all this information, the resources, the links that we talked about, the information that Keith Swiney shared with us, the information that he's going to get from HUD. We'll send all of that information out to you. So thank you guys for being with us today, and we'll talk to you on the next Tenant Talk, and we'll share information on how you can register for the next Tenant Talk. Take care, everyone.